Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience. Taking back into some football today. Jake Ciely of The Athletic was at the Combine, so we're going to get him to recap what happened there, what he saw. He was, eyes on the ground. He was seeing all the people, asking all the questions that we needed to be asked, so we'll find out what he knows. Also talk about some of the latest NFL news, and if anyone out there wants to get into a draw for $20 DK, easy stuff. Smash the like button to the episode. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and tell me where you think that Jameis Winston ends up starting in 2020. Also, if you want to get into a draw for $100 DraftKings, subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, something you enjoy about the show, and you'll be good to go. With all of this nonsense, winners announced on Mondays on the Pat Mayo Experience. Also, the Custy Awards, the best of Cust, or the worst of Cust, really. The voting is open. You can find the link to vote in the description of this video or podcast. Highly recommend it. We need to hear from the people on this one. He's the tribune of the people, so the people need to vote on what his worst takes of the year were. Highly recommend it. It's good for a laugh, even if you don't vote, either way. Anyway, I mentioned Jake Ciely would be on the show. He's on the line at All In Kid. What's up, dude?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I wore this shirt again for you. It's because it's what is it, Super Tuesday? So don't blame me. I'm voting for CODIS again.
I mean, the show doesn't come out till Wednesday, so you really dated this.
I just ruined everything for you. Redo the show. Redo your intro. Everything.
If people want to know why we missed the big news of Tuesday night, it's because we're actually recording this late on a Tuesday afternoon. But I wanted to talk some news with you first off, before anything, a few quarterback things. I threw it out that, hey, where's Jameis going to play is the giveaway. Where do you think Jameis is going to end up going?
There's part of me that I don't think the Buccaneers are completely dead in the water on this situation. I think that if you're looking at Arians, I mean, what are Arians' other options? The Rivers makes no sense. Tom Brady, he's going back with the Patriots. So what are you going to do? Bring in Tannehill? Are you going to draft somebody? There's part of me that still thinks and ends up being the Buccaneers. And I know Arians is always this master when it comes to quarterbacks. And hey, for all those interceptions, and there's all this spinning from his camp of the division, and then this playing through an injury and all this type of stuff. I still think it makes sense for the Buccaneers to bring him back and potentially draft somebody. If it's not them, maybe, I don't know. Because the thing with the Colts is the Colts with the Rivers part doesn't even really make a lot of sense, because that's not how that organization runs, where they bring in a quarterback to supplant the one that's there. They kind of more would bring in somebody like a Mariota in case Brissett breaks bad, and then Mariota looks really good in the preseason. That seems more logical to like a Rivers or something like that. So I don't know where the options are really left at this point, because the Bengals are going to draft somebody. Maybe the Dolphins. Maybe the Dolphins miss, I guess they would have to make the decision before the draft, but maybe they really are scared about not getting Tua unless they trade up and they don't want to pay that cost, and maybe they go that route. I don't know that his options are going to be very flush if it's not the Buccaneers.
Well, the Dolphins did re-sign Fitzmagic, so worst case scenario, I guess you just roll him out there, and it just seems like bringing him back into the mix, even if they end up with like Herbert in the first round as their pick as the quarterback to wait. Listen, some people are high on him. Other people are low on him.
Did you see my tweet from the Combine about Herbert?
I didn't.
You know how those people do like words and they bring it down to a letter and then they bring it back up and it's a different word. So I did it with Herbert. I went Herbert, all the way down to Bert. And then I went back up to Gabbert. He's Blaine Gabbert. Like, get over it, people.
I did see that his metrics actually shape up to be like Josh Allen-y.
I wouldn't even call him that. Josh Allen, I still think is better. The problem with Herbert has the same issues that Blaine Gabbert had, is like decision making, accuracy, throws. It's just like there's a lot, and for all the athleticism in the world, at least Josh Allen. Like, we joked about it at the draft. I made that joke to you where I said people talk about the window fitting into a tight window, and Josh Allen can't fit it into a door peephole, but he can't hit the damn door. Like, at least there was some stuff there where he did have some of those peephole throws, like fitting in those. He showed that. Like, Herbert for me has just never shown any of it. So I don't know. I'm kind of looking right now, and I don't really know where else he could possibly go. That being going back to Winston. And maybe the Broncos shock us and they're not sold on Locke. I mean, where else could we really see this happening? The Raiders and all this talk about Derek Carr is false. I mean, how many options are really out there for Winston? The Carolina Panthers, if Cam Newton's done.
Well, we'll talk about Cam in a second. I'm thinking the Chargers are the most likely destination for Jameis if he leaves Tampa.
I didn't even think about that. That's a good one.
I doubt they go with Tyrod. They just cut Travis Benjamin.
Well, they talked up Tyrod a lot. They did, speaking at the combine, and that it was even Anthony Lynn even talked up Tyrod. I was standing there at the next to the podium because I was the one that asked about the Austin Eckler situation. But yeah, when he was talking about Tyrod, you know, like they talked about, somebody brought up the question that we heard in the offseason about saying, hey, you want to get more mobile. He said, I don't really know where that came from. You know, I like a mobile quarterback, sure, but you know, I'm paraphrasing. But it wasn't like he was saying that it wasn't like, oh, I need to get a mobile quarterback. But he kept, you know, he said, the one interesting thing about Tyrod, and it could just all be coach speak. He said, you know, he's somebody, he's been with him before. He's been with Tyrod. He said he thought he was better than 2016 Tyrod. Like he thinks this is a better version. So again, could be coach speak, could be pumping it up. But I mean, really, what are you going to pump up Tyrod for? Because they're not trying to trade him. So I don't think it would be a shock, in my opinion. But I do think the Winston one kind of does make sense for that situation. It just depends on whether or not they want to go in with a competition or bring Winston in as like the guy.
Well, it really depends on what happens with Shaq Barrett, because the rumors out of Tampa is that they're going to franchise him. If they can somehow work out a deal with Barrett, then the franchise tag is available for Jameis Winston, and I think that's how he ends back up in Tampa. It just doesn't seem like they want to give him 5 years and $120 million.
No, I don't think they want to either, and I don't blame them for that because you could blame, you know, the vision, the injury, or whatever. I think they want to see. I think the ideal scenario is to do the 1 year and then see if anything improves, and then now you slap a contract on them next year. I'm just looking down again the list of teams, and I don't know, maybe the other one that you could throw out there, the Bears. They're done with Trubisky already.
I would find that hard to believe. Like, I can see them going more for, like, if Burrow goes to Cincinnati and somehow Dalton became expendable. Like, if Dalton, let's say, hits the market, is Dalton the best guy on the market?
I don't think so. I'd rather take Winston. I still think that at this point, Dalton's, you know how I feel about Dalton. I always have said this for years about the draft in general. When it comes to Dalton, I use Dalton as an example. Dalton is an above average quarterback. He's a good quarterback. You can win a Super Bowl with him. He's not going to be the reason you win a Super Bowl. And why I always used him is because I always said, I'd rather be the organization like the Cardinals just did, where you keep going back at it every 3 years, 4 years until you find your guy who can win you a Super Bowl versus being, I said, quote unquote, stuck like the Bengals have been for the past decade with a Dalton who's, you know, he's better than everything else that you could probably find and you risk on the waiver or like I said, waivers, free agency. And you're looking at that size situation, like, forget Dalton, let's go after, you know, the Tannehill last year would be a good example. Like, do we roll that dice or do we just stick with what we have? Because I don't want to call him safe, but you know what you have and it's better than the average. So I don't think he's the best. I would still rather risk the chance that Winston could be a game changer.
I think it depends on what you want out of your quarterback and the longevity of that situation. Whoever signs Jameis is going to end up signing him to not like a super long contract, but long enough. With someone like Dalton, whether it be the Bears, potentially the Colts, the Dolphins, the Panthers, if they end up going in a different direction than Cam, you can probably get Dalton basically on the same contract that Brissett just signed, like a 2-year, $40 million deal. And then you can evaluate from there and say, if you're Chicago, be like, okay, we're going to bring in Dalton to compete with Trubisky. And if Dalton's better, we'll roll with Dalton. We know our defense is still very good. Dalton should make our offense more competent. And if it doesn't work out, it's a 2-year deal, whatever. You work a lot of the guaranteed money into year one, and then they both kind of expire at the same time. Then if you need to rebuild, no big deal.
Yeah, see, I kind of think that he makes a lot of sense if the Panthers move on from Cam Newton and they don't think he's healthy enough. I think that the Panthers make some sense for what you're saying because the Panthers aren't in a position where they're drafting unless they trade up, which is going to cost way too much, likely where they're drafting. They're high enough, but they would have to leap so many teams that are going after the Tua or Burrow that maybe that's the answer. Somebody like that, the Dalton, and then next year you hope that, you secretly hope you end up tanking and then you go after like Trevor Lawrence. And so Dalton's almost like the stopgap. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then, you go back and you get your quarterback.
What do you think Cam's value on the trade market is right now? If you were a potential team, like, hell, if Brady actually walks away from the Patriots, and I expect him to play for the Patriots, well, let's say they end up letting him walk, like, doesn't that seem like the perfect destination for Cam to go to?
I saw a lot of people saying that made a perfect destination for Andy Dalton to go to. And if you're looking at a similarity for offensive style, Dalton makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, Cam Newton could be if he's even 90% of what he used to be, he could change that team and help that. Right? Look, I don't know at this point. We might get the answer finally. It's always been the answer. Is it Belichick? Is it Brady? Is it more one than the other? Or is it 50-50 or whatever? But Tom Brady stopped making receivers better the last 2 seasons. Like, he's been good with the good talent, but he hasn't been back in the day when he was making Troy Browns of the world and Deion Branches, relevant. So I think if you look at the situation, Cam Newton would make a lot of sense, but he would have to be similar to the Cam Newton we used to know. I think the Dalton makes sense. For the Patriots, I think even Rivers would kind of make sense if it's not Brady. But the Cam Newton situation, the one thing you did hear for this is another one to go back to the combine from Rule, is Rule loves Cam Newton. If Cam Newton is healthy and the organization's okay with him, he's going to be back with the Panthers. Another one that makes sense is actually the Redskins, because you know how much the Ron Rivera, he would love him. And he has zero ties to Haskins, even though I think they should just keep Haskins going out there. I could see Cam Newton end up with the Redskins too.
If Haskins was thrown back into this draft, where do you think he would end up going at quarterback? 4, 5?
No, I actually think he would go, arguably, in my opinion, I think he would have a chance to go number 2, because it would depend on if the team feels confident enough in Tua. Everything was sounded good at the combine. Everybody's like, oh, the himp's 100% and he looks good. He looks good moving around, but you still don't have any testing from him. You still haven't seen anything. It's a big question mark. You might get the question of whether, do you go with the Haskins and the rawness, or do you go with the Haskins and the fact that, he's projectable? But you're also saying if he's in this draft, are you saying he's in this draft with another year of college, or he's in this draft as last year's Dwayne Haskins?
He's in this draft as one. The Redskins throw him back into the player pool after 1 year in Washington. They're like, all right, we don't want this guy anymore. We're going to chuck him back in. And now he is eligible to draft. Like, I think teams would still prefer risking it with Tua, even if he has to sit a year or sit the first half of the year.
I actually don't.
Haskins.
No, I think Haskins showed enough late in the seasons with the Haskins. You know how I feel. Now, granted, I'm somebody who is a fan of Haskins coming out of college for a 1-year starter and only played a little bit over 1 year in general. As a rookie, you saw the signs of improvement. The one thing that I really do like at it is that he didn't get scared off by the NFL. We've seen quarterbacks go the opposite direction. We've seen quarterbacks regress. We've seen quarterbacks just stay who they are. He improved. And the one good thing, and go back what I was saying about out of college about Dwayne Haskins, is he knows how to hit receivers in stride, to keep them in space, to keep them moving. It's why I told you back last year at this time, I thought he was the perfect fit for the Giants before they traded Odell Beckham, because you give him somebody like that. Well, he's got Terry McLaurin. The Redskins are going to address the wide receiver position, but not even that, just as a Haskins of his own right. I think you would have a conversation. I don't think all teams would line up and agree with Haskins, but I don't think all teams out there would line up and agree with Tua. I think it would depend on the situation. So I think he would be second or third off the board, depending on what teams decided.
Darius Geis, Adrian Peterson, and Bryce Love are all projected to have roles in the Skins backfield this year. But is this solely because Geis continues to get injured year after year after year, that you can't just be like, hey, Geis is our dude, and then all of a sudden he's hurt after 3 snaps?
The Redskins would love if Geis was the dude. He's actually mimicking Leonard Fournette's career quite a bit. Injured in college, injured the first 2 years in the NFL, actually injured more than Leonard Fournette. And the similarities to Fournette when he came out of college, a very, very talented running back. Most people didn't realize how good they were as pass catchers, because LSU until recently ran an antiquated offense that didn't use the running backs of the backfield that much in the passing game. Geis has a talent. I would still say to this day, as a pure talent, if he's 100% healthy, I would take him with a slight edge over Leonard Fournette. That being said, if you put Leonard Fournette in this backfield and Trent Williams is convinced to come back, and they do tag Brandon Scherff as they're talking about, that offensive line goes from questionable to pretty strong. I wouldn't put it in the side like top 5, maybe even the top 10, but it goes from being bottom of the league to respectable, at least, especially if you get Trent Williams back. And if Darius Geis, I think next year could end up being like similar to Miles Sanders, but not in the rookie situation. Is he somebody that maybe you let somebody else deal with the frustrations early on, and you're really not expecting much until the second half, where he gets healthier, almost like Dalvin Cook when he came back from his injury. I think Adrian Peterson's going to be involved. Love, for all the people that are concerned about it. So there's 2 factors. Look at that. Love, I do think, will be draftable next year. I said that when the draft process rolled out last year for the NFL draft process, is that was a long-term draft pick, only 1 year long-term, but a 1-year draft pick, long-term thought of Chris Thompson's going to be gone. They want their new Chris Thompson. If you just want to know the role that Bryce Love is going to fill, it's Chris Thompson's role. That means there can still be a fringy RB1 on this team, because he's just going to fill that role. Bryce Love isn't going to be the lead guy.
You mentioned about Austin Eckler. What did Anthony Lynn say about him?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of differing opinions out there with the answer that he gave, but basically the question I threw out to him was that Austin Eckler at the beginning of the season, and he said over 20 touches per game, is he somebody you can feel comfortable doing that for an entire season? And he goes, I gave him I think he misunderstood the question a little bit because he said, yeah, he's got 20 touches before. I like using him. I like using him, not even in the backfield. And I understand what he was saying, but the concern about it is that he went on. So at first it sounds really positive. And then he goes on, I could see him where I like to use him in a tandem role. So now we start to head downhill a little bit. He's like, I could see him out wide with somebody else in the backfield with him or both of them in the backfield together. Basically, I need another guy. And that's how he finished this question. So, his answer to the question. So there's a lot of people out there, like my initial reaction is, that's not so good for Austin Eckler. And then there's other people spinning, like, look, he's going to be used out wide. You want him in that role. But here's what I'm saying about it is the only reason I'm pulling back is because there was a push this offseason up until now, and it's still the offseason, but there's been people out there that have said, Austin Eckler with no Melvin Gordon, he's an RB1 next year. He was an RB1 this year. But I think Austin Eckler at the beginning of this season was used that way with the knowledge that at some point Melvin Gordon was coming back. And they even tried other options with Jackson back there. And the fact that he said he wants another guy, I don't like Jordan Howard, but I could see Jordan Howard being brought in. Mm-hmm. And I say all that is because Austin Eckler for PPR, sure, fringy RB1, he's essentially James White. And the problem is, what if those carries are 3 or 4 one week? What if they're up by a lot and they're grinding it out with Jordan Howard or whoever it might be? What if he's not getting the touchdown success because he's not getting the carries inside the 5, probably not all of them inside the 10. He will be valuable. He is a great RB2, but I was only pushing that out there and saying this to say, let's chill out a little bit on the RB1 talk. And there are some people who value him as such and still think he can be as such. So if you're in a dynasty or keeper league, maybe you float him out there in a trade offer.
The other possibility that goes with the Chargers too, that the usage that we've seen out of whether it be Sproles or Danny Woodhead and now Austin Eckler in the backfield, how much of that is scheme related and how much of that is just Phillip Rivers related? Now, if Rivers isn't there, do we expect to see the same sort of target share for the running backs out of that backfield? Because no matter who the coaches were for the Chargers, whether it be LA or San Diego, that just seemed to be something that was a Rivers trademark.
And that's part of the concern. You talked about Winston before. Well, what if Winston comes here? Do we see that same type of use out of the backfield for the running backs? And is it all going to be Eckler only when he's lined up on the line of scrimmage or out wide? So I think that's a legitimate thought to keep in the back of your mind. It's going to depend on the scheming with the quarterback situation because it's definitely not going to be Rivers. Heck, what if they do draft Justin Herbert? And what if they start Justin Herbert from day one? And then you have that concern on top of it. So I just think there's obviously a scenario where Austin Eckler finishes as a fringe RB1 in full point PPR. Half point PPR, downgrade even further. If you still play a non-PPR, you really downgrade Austin Eckler. But all that being said, I feel like right now where we are in the offseason, there's a lot more negative potential than there is positive potential.
What do you make of the reports? And this is a Matthew Berry interview with Mike Mayock at the Combine. Why was Matthew Berry getting all the scoops and you weren't?
Because he works for that company with the 4 letters that can pull people in that I can't.
That makes a lot more sense now that you spell it out in that way with those 4 letters. But Matthew Berry talking to Mike Mayock asked about, a question that us fans, at least he's doing the Lord's work out there, Matthew Berry, asking about if Josh Jacobs' receiving role is going to expand into year 2. And Mike Mayock seemed to indicate that this is going to be phase 2 of Josh Jacobs. They're not bringing back DeAndre Washington. Jalen Rocket Richard has re-signed, so we do know that he's a pass-catching specialist, but he's also a special teamer as well. So there is a possibility that, instead of averaging 2 targets a game, if we bump up Josh Jacobs to 4 or 5 targets a game, he's won't be the number 1 overall fantasy player, but he's in contention to have that kind of year if everything breaks right.
Oh, absolutely. I think you and I talked about this in the way too early rankings, and there was already rumors from somebody else out there that this was coming from the team, that he was going to be used more next year in the passing game. And it wouldn't be a shock because he has the talent. We've seen it. And whether or not it was to bring him along slowly as a rookie season, just to kind of, make sure he wasn't overexposed or overworked for that workload going from college to the NFL, whatever it might be. This shouldn't come as a shock to anybody who watched Josh Jacobs or the Raiders or know the talent that Jacobs has. You're 100% right. Look, I had him inside my top 10 in the offseason rankings, and I would keep him there 100% with this news. I'm not going to push him inside the top 5 with the greats of the world, like even Saquon Barkley, with hoping for a bounce back. But if he started knocking on the door of the Dalvin Cook, the Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, like all that group, if he started doing that next year, it wouldn't come as a shock to me.
Chris Harris is not going to re-sign with the Broncos and like the alleged suitors right now. The Jets are in on every team. As it turns out, no one wants to play for the Jets. Maybe after they watch Curb from the weekend that they're going to be like, we feel really bad for the Jets. Maybe we'll go there if we're good players. But Cowboys, Lions, Jets, and Texans all seem to be like the ones rumored to be in the mix for Chris Harris right now. But he was the best slot corner in the league before they bumped him to the outside. And since they've done that, he's been like good, but not elite. Do you think that any team that goes after him is going to be like, listen, man, you're playing the slot?
It really depends. I think that you might get a team that overpays him. And do I say overpays because of what the market's going to bear for him? Because like we're talking about all these potential free agents in this draft class, and it's like franchise tag news galore is going to be spilling out once that's official out there with all these rumors, and it's just crossing names off the board one by one. So just what's left out there, I think he's going to be overpaid for what he is, because you mentioned that when he was outside, he wasn't as good. You see Justin Coleman, the contract that he got, and he was really good for the first half of the season of the slot. I'm not comparing Harris to Coleman, but I'm just saying, if you are a slot corner, the days in the NFL are starting to realize that there's value there with how the offense is run now. And the fact that people think he can play outside well, which he can play well, but he's definitely not elite outside anymore. I think he's going to be overpaid. And I think somebody's going to ask him to do both like we saw. So I don't think that you're going to find a team that's willing to invest that kind of money and say you're only a slot corner. That's the problem, is that the money it's going to take to get Chris Harris is going to be too much for just a slot guy.
Dak Prescott is rumored to be franchise tagged by the Dallas Cowboys. They still might work out a long-term deal, but Zeke is taking up an awful lot of that money. So maybe they extend Cooper to a longer-term deal, franchise Dak this year, kick the can down the road one more season and figure out what they want to do long-term and how much money they can actually allocate to giving him while keeping him under the cap. And then Blake Jarwin is expected to sign his tender, remain with the team while Jason Witten goes away. If it's just Blake Jarwin as the guy in Dallas, does that make him a fringy top 10 candidate for next year?
I think it depends on what they do with the Randall Cobb situation, because Randall Cobb isn't going to demand a giant contract. And there's a connection here. Well, that McCarthy guy that he used to play for before. I think this team could try and find a way to get Cobb back. Obviously, that's going to be a kind of a waterfall effect of what happens. I mean, somebody might go after Cobb and overpay him based on what's happened, obviously performance-wise for the past few seasons, but maybe it's before the Cowboys have their ducks in order with what you're mentioning with that Dak Prescott situation and Amari Cooper. So it might not be timing wise, but I say that because if they bring back Cobb, I think we can see it's McCarthy. We can see the Packers situation where if it's only Blake Jarwin isn't any amazing tight end, where he kind of just gets left out and he's inconsistent, similar to all the years with the Packers. Now, if they don't bring back Cobb or a similar receiver to Cobb, then I think Jarwin might be a little bit interesting. But I think if you're looking at it, you're still talking about the fact that if Cooper's back, you're talking about Cooper, Gallup, Zeke, before you even get to who the fourth option is, whether it is Cobb or Jarwin. So I don't think it'll be too consistent on this offense. But, all it takes is 6 or 7 touchdowns over the full season in your tight end one anyway.
What do you think is more likely? Matt Stafford is the starting quarterback for the Detroit Lions to begin in week 1, or Tom Brady is the starting quarterback for the Patriots in week 1?
Can I just do a parlay of both of them and say 100% for both?
You really do think it's 100%?
I don't think Matthew Stafford is going. Well, first of all, you're talking about Matthew Berry. It was in that room in the same conversation that Matthew Berry reported in that article where it said, don't believe the talk about the Lions drafting Tua, because the Lions also, they're going with Staff. Nobody's going to bowl them over with a trade offer that's going to make them willing to eat that dead money and see what Matthew Stafford was before he got hurt last year. I know the injuries are starting to pile up with him. Matthew Stafford was playing balls out last year before he got hurt. If Matthew Stafford's healthy, there's no reason for I agree. Like Lions, you're thinking long-term, similar to the Browns for the past couple seasons before all this started to come together for them. is if you're thinking long term, yeah, trade him for 2 first rounders. I just don't think anybody's doing that because they're going to want that to eat that dead money and to look, they're going to be telling their fan base, suck it up. We're going to suck again for a couple more seasons. I just don't think Stafford's not there. I don't see any scenario where it makes sense. And Tom Brady, I tweeted about that too. This is just a Dwayne Wade the first go around when he was faking like, oh, I'm going to go talk to the Bulls. And that's like, hey, guess what? He was just getting intel on everybody else. You're telling me Tom Brady and the Patriots aren't smart enough to go like, hey, let me go interview with this team and see what their offseason plans are. Hey, Bill, this is what they're doing. Let's go do this. Like Tom Brady's under center for the Patriots. Matthew Stafford's under center for the Lions. Like I said, I wish there was like a 2-bet parlay I could do in Vegas on it.
Well, if that's the case, then what is the logic to Detroit keeping the number 3 pick? Because you assume Burrow goes number 1, Chase Young goes number 2. Do you really want to be sitting there with 3, knowing like 8 teams behind you want a quarterback, whoever it might be, that just traded at the pick?
Oh, absolutely not. The Lions 100% should trade out of that pick unless the Redskins do something and don't take Chase Young. If the Redskins trade out and somebody jumps to 2 to take Tua, or the Redskins shock the world and go, maybe they don't bring back Trent Williams, they get a first rounder and they take an offensive lineman just because, hey, it's the Redskins, whatever. Like, unless Chase Young is on the board at number 3 for the Lions, it 100% makes there's no reason they should stay at number 3, even if it's not somebody paying up to get to it, even if they only move back 3 spots and get a second rounder. For the fact that this team has so many needs outside of basically what? Wide receiver and tight end. And then obviously if they keep Stafford,
they would get more than a second rounder. They'd probably get a first next year and a second rounder this year for that pick, where even if it's the Giants who trade up with them 1 pick, like that's what the market was set with Trubisky.
You would think, but you got to have somebody willing on the other side. I was saying like that's what I was throwing out, like only a second to move back 2 spots to like 5 with the Dolphins or something like that. You would think. I'm not saying it makes sense from that side. I would agree with you. You would think, but I mean, I put it this way. That's the reason I answered that way, is because if that was the only thing you could get, it still makes sense, is what my point was. Is that's why I'm agreeing with what your first part of the question was, is should the Lions stay at number 3? Absolutely not. Even if they only got a second to move back 2 spots, they should.
The Dolphins, I think, have the best package if they do want to move out. If Tua is available at that spot and they want Tua, because they have those Houston first-round picks that they can just easily.
Right.
And they have the Pittsburgh first-round pick as well, that they seem to have the best package to put together if they want to get to that pick.
They do. There's only 2 teams besides them that really have anything that they can offer, is the Jaguars with the 2 first rounders, but they have Nick Foles and Gardner Minshew. And then the Raiders, which the Raiders, as you mentioned, don't have the same package. They do have 2 first rounders to move up if they wanted to try. They'd probably have to throw an next year's first rounder on top of it. But that's really, again, I think the Raiders like Derek Carr a lot. I mean, Derek Carr, metric wise, was in the top 10 in a lot of areas. So it's whether or not you believe what you see with your eyes or you believe the numbers.
All right, let's talk about the Combine. You were there. Is it the second year you've gone now, or the third year?
Second year in a row. Yeah.
So what was it easier the second time around? Like the first year when you go to like one of these giant events, there's part of like the awe of it, like you're taking it in, like, oh, who's that guy? Like, what's going on over here? I feel like the second time around, you know where everything is. You know where to find everyone. That feeling of awe has passed, that you really hammer down and find some stuff out.
Yes. So that part of it was easier. The actual, what the NFL did to us, and I say us as in like the media, did not make it easier. So it offset, because last year, as you and I talked about on your show, so last year when you walk into the room where all the podiums are that you see on TV, you walk in and right to your left, there's 6 small tables that could probably fit like 4 or 5 people around them. And then you have the 8 podiums, and starting with number 1 last year, that's where Murray was. So basically every top player during they did in a 15-minute segments last year would be 1 all the way down to 8. So 7 and 8 were like fringy guys. And then when you get to the tables, those are like the guys, they don't expect anything to happen. Like that's where Travis Fulgham was for Modi. That's where I sat down with him and talked for 15 minutes. This year, so not only did they get rid of last year where like the quarterbacks lasted an hour, 4 segments of 15 minutes for an hour. You had the running backs go over an hour. You had the wide receivers go over an hour. So not only did they do that and they condense it down to now where it was 30 minutes, but they did it for 30 minutes where quarterbacks and wide receivers were out there together. the running backs were two segments back to back, and that was it for the running backs. So you had to pick and choose a lot more this year of who you could go and try to ask questions to or who you could go listen to. So that made it more difficult. But to your point, it was a lot easier. Is it like, hey, I knew what to look for. I knew where to go. I knew how to slide in and get towards the podium if I wanted to. Like I don't know if you saw it, but I asked Gettleman about his analytics. I was right next to him for that question because I knew where to go. And so it was easier in that facet, but the NFL made it harder because they wanted all that prime time combine stuff.
Who is going to be the impact running back that you saw there?
So I had when the offseason started back at the end of the college football season, I initially had like a big three. For me, it was Swift, Taylor, and Dobbins. Now, Swift has started to pull a little bit ahead for me, and I almost kind of feel like my next three, and there's like a third here now with them, is I'm looking right now. I actually have Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of right there with them. I still think Taylor, because like is a nice step in front of him. I still think Dobbins is, but he's starting to get close. Jonathan Taylor, I like a ton. The question I actually asked him, I said, what's the biggest myth you're trying to dispel at the combine? And he said that people from Wisconsin are not just first and second down power guys that we can catch, that we are explosive out of the backfield. If you saw last year, he got a few catches, got over 20 last year, or maybe right at 20. It was like 20 to 23, somewhere around there. But you like to see that. And if you watched him, you can see he has that potential. If you also watch too, though, I still think Swift is the best all-around talent. I think he's kind of almost in that Todd Gurley mold of when he first came out, just being able to do anything you want from him. But I think that a lot is going to depend because this draft class is super deep. A lot's going to depend on where these guys go. Swift, in my opinion, should be the first, can be a workhorse, every down running back. But if he ends up somewhere in a timeshare, that's going to change things where if Jonathan Taylor goes somewhere where he's getting 20 touches a game, obviously for fantasy purposes, you put him in front. I can see any of those three and maybe even Edwards-Helaire having that kind of fantasy impact next year. Maybe even Cam Akers too, but I think those guys have a leg up on everybody else.
I'm looking at it right now, and the first team to draft a running back. Like, do you think any of these guys go in the first round? Because the only place I can really imagine anyone going is number 9 to Jacksonville if Jacksonville cuts Fournette, but I don't think they're going to cut Fournette, so let's just pass on all of them. Then we get into maybe Tampa at 14, but they seem to be like a forward-thinking passing offense that, hey, we can patch together running. We can go sign Phillip Lindsay off the street. We don't need to draft a running back in the first round. Like, when do these guys actually go?
I think the earliest you might see somebody go is the Dolphins, similar to the Raiders, is that, yeah, this is probably not the team that's going to turn around and get into the playoffs next year, but maybe 2 years. They have a lot of room to make some moves, like just in the draft and everything. So I think that it wouldn't be a shock if I saw the Dolphins take them. I'm kind of with you other than that. Looking at the first round where it's kind of twofold. It's where do you see these situations, just looking down the draft list, like where do you see somewhere where it makes sense for them to draft? And you threw out a couple of those, and you could throw out a couple more where you could say, you can see the Texans, but the Texans are going to spend Texans don't have a first rounder, right? So you look at it, the fact is, the talent here is also the catch on top of it is, the Dolphins, that second pick is late. If they don't trade up, they make sense there. But if you don't take somebody in the first round, so what? Dobbins goes in the second. Good. Take him in the second. Hell, if Akers or Edwards, actually even Anthony McFarland, because I got the list up right here next to AJ Dillon, honestly, if any of these guys are in the third round, I just don't see the need to in this draft to take anybody in the first round.
So realistically, like fantasy-wise, if we're talking about it right now, that there's not such a huge discrepancy in talent between any of these guys that whoever ends up in the best position, so whoever ends up as Miami's running back, they name him the starter, he's going to be the most valuable guy. Unless, let's say, Atlanta ends up. They let Freeman walk and they draft a run. But they have Quadre Olison, too, who might just be their guy.
See, that's where I'm looking right now, and like that, my kind of tiers of what I would say. I think like Benjamin with the Atlanta Falcons could make some sense. And then you do use Olsen and them in a tandem. So for fantasy purposes, now we're going down that road where it's almost kind of like a Royce Freeman, Phillip Lindsay, although the Broncos inexplicably, as we've talked about on your show at the end with the rankings, is all of a sudden if Royce Freeman started being the pass catcher. But a lot of these guys, Anthony McFarland's 5'9", less than 200 pounds. A lot of these guys could end up in timeshare situations where, even if you want to go up the list, go back to Dobbins. I could see Dobbins getting drafted into Kareem Hunt type of situation where he goes to a team that has something like Spencer Ware before he got hurt with the Chiefs that season. And we're just waiting and saying, Miles Sanders, we're waiting for the second half. So a lot of them might not have an impact depending on where they go until later into the fantasy season. obviously there's a lot of scenarios like with the Dolphins, with the Texans, situations where we could say, if we're getting 20 touches right out of the gate, boom, they're going to leapfrog some of the better talents.
Do we think that Lamar Miller comes back for the Texans?
I
don't. I really don't know.
I don't know if Lamar Miller has a job next year at this point, honestly. Just because of this draft class and then what's in free agency and then looking at the teams. I mean, he at best, I think, might end up with like, hey, you're the third option we sign after the draft, after free agency, all that. And then we're just kind of like, let's just bring you in for depth purposes where you compete with our third guy. Like, I think he's kind of done at this point.
Well, with the talk that Philip Lindsay is probably they're not going to re-sign him in Denver, it seems, or at least not what he wants. So if they let him test free agency and he's gone, would this be a time to buy Royce Freeman in Dynasty?
No, because they're already talking. Well, the conflicting report was that they came out and said that they want a compliment to Lindsay, that they might draft their compliment to Lindsay. So which is it? Like, are you sticking with Lindsay and you want a compliment? Because that side of it's like, well, that doesn't sound very good about Royce Freeman, who you just drafted 2 years ago. So what happened with Royce Freeman all of a sudden? So I have no idea what the Broncos just feel like they just keep throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. Like, look at the quarterback position.
Yeah, this is true. Maybe eventually they'll luck into something like they kind of did with Philip Lindsay. But when you draft a guy in the set, was he 7th round or was he non-drafted? He was non-drafted.
Undrafted, yeah.
So when you're paying him nothing, you can run that guy into the ground and then don't bother re-signing him in a million. Just go find another Philip Lindsay or stick with the guy that you drafted highly anyway and wanted to make the guy. It does seem like they are going to let Lindsay test free agency and maybe they'll match whatever comes in or pay him a little bit more. But for the moment, it looks like he could be gone. So that's another interesting scenario to see how that unfolds. If they don't draft anyone or bring anyone else in, that it could be Freeman, and somehow Devontae Booker isn't dead yet.
Yeah, he essentially is for all intents and purposes.
This is true. Wide receivers from the combine, besides we'll talk about like the very, very top end names in a second, but who kind of jumped off the page to you just being like, oh my God, like that guy looks great?
Well, so like, it's tough here. So like the one person I'll even throw out there that looked great, but didn't look great to me. Look, now, if you just said testing wise, it's Mims and everybody's talking about Mims. Everybody's talking about Mims and like pushing him. There's some people pushing him to the first round. This is what I tweeted. Funny enough, I tweeted this out before the show this morning for everybody. I already ruined it, but for Wednesday. So yesterday, if you want to go look for the tweet, I said about Mims is the fact that he's a perfect example where people overrate the combine too much. And you know me, I say you cannot do one without the other. You can't be a pure film guy and ignore the metrics. You can't be a pure metrics guy and ignore the film. Mims is the perfect example of somebody who blew away the combine. Everybody's going nuts talking about first round on him, but go watch him play. And it was funny. I was texting Emery Hunt of The Athletic, a football game plan, who I still think is the best scout in all the world. And I texted him, I was like, are you seeing the same thing I am with Mims? And if you watch him play, the dude doesn't know how to stack a corner, which for everybody out there, that's where you run up on the corner and cause him to stack. He likes cause him to move back and you get your position there. He essentially runs into the corner. Like I watched 2 plays where I thought he was going to be a blocker. And that's the thing with Mims is he's not precise. He's kind of like, it's like he's lacking knowledge in some of his routes that he runs, but he's athletically gifted. You can learn these things, but let's chill out. And for people that are putting him in the first round and putting in the top 5 of wide receivers, he's still got issues. And he's got issues if you watch him. So he caught my eye because he did blow away the combine. And initially, I didn't even have Mims inside the top 10 wide receivers. I might move him up because those are learnable traits. Coming out of college, a good example is Marquise Lee, who was athletically gifted, better than anybody you played against, but he kind of ran his route soft and he took things casually because he was just that much athletically better than everybody else. He learned after 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL that you can't do that anymore. That might be the Mims scenario, but that's why you don't want Mims for next year. Maybe he's down the road. So he caught the eye of a lot of people. Claypool, Notre Dame, there you go right there. I think he caught the eye of a lot of people like Boykin last year, blew away the combine. But there's a converse side of it, Pat. You know, a lot of people are talking about this, like, what did Boykin do? Now, I'm still a Boykin fan. Boykin hasn't done a lot much yet in the NFL. I still think there's promise for him. There's promise for Claypool too. But if you watch Claypool play, as good as he tested and as fast as he was, if you watch him play, he plays slow. He's almost like the inverse of Jerry Rice. Runs a 4.7, but Jerry Rice plays a lot faster. There's an argument out there for people, like this is one of the things about the combine, that the Notre Dame athletic training squad knows how to get people to test well. And you could look at that and say, you know what, maybe some of these players that are testing really well, if you watch them play and you don't see the same thing that they test, don't get caught up in it because they just might test well. They just meet Darrell Green Beckham. They just might be athletically freak and very good at testing.
Well, if we know anything about Notre Dame, is that they just allow people to cheat on tests, so that would make a lot of sense that they would end up testing well. I'm in on this Mims guy, though. We can just call him Mimsy, and that'll be perfect for me. And like, if he went,
I knew you would have something.
if he went to Baylor and Carolina has an early second-round pick, doesn't he make a lot of logical sense with Rule and the guys that they already have? Like, you have Samuel and you have DJ Moore. Don't you think adding like a big body with two like possession guys who run very crisp routes makes some sense?
It does, and here's where you can go the other way with it too. And like again, I'm not saying Mims can't be good, and I'm not saying don't get excited. Mimsy, don't get. Yeah, I actually remember. Like, what is the song that it was? It's the hot song. You like what was the Mims song that was so popular for the longest time? I'll think of it at some point. But anyway, your point there is if they use them in the right way, you know, you could get past that. If you just like ask them to run and then you ask them to like, you know, hey, stop trying to run into the corner and push him off of you. Just run past the guy. Stop getting caught. The thing is, he gets caught up too much with the hands and they fight. Like, just go run, dude. I say all that. Look, DK Metcalf. The Seattle Seahawks knew DK Metcalf's route tree was limited. If you saw the Next Gen Stats tweeted out all the time that he spent 90% of the time in one area on the field. Just ask him to do what he can do and don't ask him to do more yet. And yeah, that actually is a good fit. There's a lot of teams Mims could be a good fit for. It's all going to depend on if the team uses them in the right way. There's a lot of teams that will ask people to do more than they're able to do right out of the gate.
While you mentioned that there are scenarios that if Trent Williams doesn't come back, that maybe Washington takes an offensive lineman instead of Chase Young. But if you're going to do that, wouldn't you just trade the pick and maybe trade down to get one of these receivers instead?
Wait, which one?
We talked about Washington. That if Trent Williams doesn't come back, then maybe they pass. That there's a possibility because they're Washington that they pass on Young, draft an offensive lineman. If that was going to be the case, and they wanted to do that, wouldn't it be more valuable to trade the number 2 pick, move down, and then have your pick of whoever the best O lineman is, or maybe one of the best receivers?
Okay. And then that's why I kind of got confused because basically in my mind, I'm just thinking like, it's just Chase Young, move on, stop thinking about it. But yeah, I could kind of see like, if you're not there, like, here's the thing. The Redskins should trade down. The Lions should trade down. The Giants should trade down. There's a lot of opportunities here for teams to trade down. You get past the Dolphins. There's some other options that, hey, maybe somebody's really fond of Herbert and wants to trade it. Obviously, this draft makes sense for everybody essentially inside the top 10 that needs multiple pieces to trade down. All that being said, on the flip side is you need somebody who's willing to trade up and willing to make that spot happen. So yes, the number 2 spot makes a ton of sense for the Redskins. It's just whether or not, like, it's kind of twofold with them. Do you pass on who is essentially a franchise defensive lineman who should be a Pro Bowler from day one, who should be the cornerstone of your defense for the next decade? Do you throw that away just to get more picks and more help elsewhere, especially when that's not even one of your weaknesses? They actually have a good defensive line. So it's just the thinking of the front office. And there is a lot of sense to trade down. And, you know, the flip side is like the Giants. Tons of sense for them to trade down. Gettleman doesn't trade down. He's just whatever. There's another thing real quick from the combine. Be careful what you read about coaches saying this or GMs saying this or whatever. Like, I was there with the Gettleman thing, and I'm not trying to call anybody out. It's just, you know, look, this is headlines, people make them and all that type of stuff. But Gettleman was asked about the number 4 pick and that he doesn't trade down. And he goes, we're always willing to do everything. That's just why he created the Daniel Jones nonsense where everybody's talking about, like, is Daniel Jones the answer next year? Because Dave Gettleman creates his own problem. He always says the exact same thing. This is what we do, but we're always exploring all options. We're always open to everything. We're blah, blah, blah. So then you hear the report that the number 4 pick is in play. He never really said come trade for the number 4 pick. He just said we're always exploring all options.
I think the Skins would be nuts not to take Chase Young.
I agree. I think anybody would be nuts, except obviously the Bengals, because you need your quarterback. I'm not 100% sold on Burrow, but the Bengals, if you're at number 1, you don't take Chase Young and not take your quarterback.
The move for the Bengals is to dupe Washington into trading up to number 1 to take Chase Young. Be like, no, we're going to take Chase Young. They're like, no, we want to have Chase Young. Maybe they're not stupid enough anymore to do it, but like a year ago, that would have been in play.
It possibly very well would have been in play a year ago. Ron Rivera's there now too, so he's talking some sense into that front office.
All right, last one. This is a question from the audience. Tim Andercust really wants car thief Doug Judy to fall to number 11 for the New York Jets. Jerry Judy is what others call him. I prefer to call him Doug Judy. But can he make it there? Will he go to the Jets?
So he can make it there. So there's another one. Let's talk. Forget running back. If you're going after a wide receiver, like I see no reason to take one. Or like essentially, there's going to be several that go in the first round. On the flip side, I kind of say why. They just wait till the second round. This wide receiver class is freaking loaded. If you want a complete wide receiver, there's a complete wide receiver. If you want a slot option, there's a slot option. If you want an outside guy only, if you want a red zone, and there's like, so even the ones that have issues, there's answers up and down the line. Like I'm looking right now, and I would say there's 20 wide receivers that I could see going in the first 3 rounds, like just talent wise, maybe even more than that. It's a ridiculous class. But I say all that too, because even if Judy's there, 2 reasons I don't think the Jets should. I think Judy's better in the slot than he is outside. Well, they have this Jamison Crowder guy there already. So what are you going to do? Are you going to force this again? Kind of goes to the DK Metcalf situations. The Seattle Seahawks let him do what he does. Are you going to force Judy outside? I think he can play outside, but it's similar to the Juju Smith-Schuster situation where do we force him out of his position just to say like we want to make that compliment and have the best talent? Or do you go one deeper and take CeeDee Lamb, who plays outside? So I think he could be there, but I actually don't think if he's there, he's necessarily the best pick for the Jets.
I'm just trying to look at the board right now and see who actually needs a receiver. I guess if Cleveland trades Beckham, they could use a receiver, but they're probably not going to trade Beckham. Jacksonville can kind of use everything, but I doubt they end up using that on a receiver. Arizona's iffy because you get Fitz is coming back, but he's going to be.
You have Isabella.
Like you have guys, but you could use like an elite presence on that team. So maybe they're in play. I doubt Carolina at 7. The Chargers probably not, especially if they end up franchising Hunter Henry. Miami, they just re-signed Parker. Preston Williams is coming back. They're fine. The Giants have enough pieces. Detroit has enough pieces. They're not taking a receiver at 3. So if we reverse it, it's the Jets, the Raiders, and the Colts at 11, 12, and 13 seem like the most logical options for a receiver.
And I think the Colts make a ton of sense, obviously, but it's also going to depend to kind of like, is your front office thinking like I am where, all right, maybe we don't get Judy. Maybe we don't get Lamb. Maybe we don't get Michael Pittman. Oh, okay. Well, then you know what? We'll get T. Higgins in the second round. Well, some people want T. Higgins in the first round, but maybe you go, hey, Liberty. I went there for a year and a half. Maybe you go get Gandy Golden. Like, there's going to be options in the second round. Are they elite? No. Are they very damn good? Yes. And I think that's what, here's a good example I'll give you is like, look at the Falcons. Julio Jones is elite. Calvin Ridley is really damn good. And I think that you look at it, you say, well, do you get the Julio or do you address and make yourself more complete team by fixing a bigger, it's kind of like when we talk about, you love the Travis Kelce argument, taking him in the first, second round at the turn situation because the drop-off is greater at one position than the other. So do you address the drop-off being greater at offensive line, defensive lines, corners? There's like 2 or 3 top-end corners this year. Do you do that and then say, you know what? The drop-off is so much less at wide receiver that's more important. And I think that's where I would be sitting as a GM. Of course, not all teams are going to be thinking the same.
True, and I guess what the Jets end up doing in free agency, if they end up signing 2 corners and a no lineman, then maybe it is receiver they end up going with. Anyway, Jake Ciely, theathletic.com, at AllInKid on Twitter. Tell everyone where they can get the promo code to sign up for theathletic.com.
Yeah, the easiest way is theathletic.com/AllinSports, the name of the podcast, which you can listen to. Please do. I have an evergreen show up there right now. I don't know if I'll get to one this week because I went from the combine to one day at home to turn around to go to Florida for labor and the first pitch. Yay, baseball. And now I'm back trying to catch up on that. And then I go back out next week for New York for Tout Wars in New York. And then 2 weeks after that, I'm in I'm going back to Tampa for WrestleMania with D'Angelo Williams.
Gee, this sounds like you're a very busy man, Jake. Keep it on the go and follow Jake on Twitter to keep up with all his latest traveling, world traveler, intra-United States traveler, Jake Ciely. You can figure out all this stuff. He can show you where the best
East Coast traveler.
Yeah, if he can show you where all the best Waffle Houses are down the East Coast, it'll be fine. Anyway,
oh God.
Listen, my stomach would hurt more if I just went to Waffle House. But either way, you can follow me at ThePME, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. If you do that and you rate it 5 stars, along with your DraftKings handle and something you like about the show, you are in a draw for $100 DK. Smash the like button for the video. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section. And you tell me where you think Jameis will be starting in 2020. You'll be in the draw for 20 DK bucks. Winners announced on Monday's show. Thank you all for watching. Back later this week with maybe some NCAA stuff, maybe some MMA stuff, maybe some baseball stuff. Who knows what's on the horizon? But you'll just have to tune in to find out. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience. Experience!